All right, good morning or good afternoon. My name is William Cox. This is my study on the effects of online homework for high school college algebra students. I'm a high school math teacher myself. I have 6 years teaching college algebra, and this study concerns some of my students. So this was an action research project. What we're going to discuss in essence is the difference between giving students homework through the textbook you see on the left. That's the Essentials of College Algebra. It's an 11th edition text, and giving students their homework from what you see on the right. So this is a window that would belong to My Math Lab. That's a Pearson textbooks online homework site. So the purpose of doing homework, if you are a math student, is perhaps more significant than it is in other courses. When a student sees a math lecture, they may be passively taking in what you are telling them. And when they're taking a test, they're likely reproducing something that they've memorized recently. If the purpose of teaching a student how to solve a math problem is to teach them to do it, then there should be a special emphasis on where and how they do math on their own time. This kind of skills practice is whichever form for homework that you choose. And so this interest provides great justification for looking into how doing this online might impact a student who formerly did their homework through a textbook. I hypothesize that an online homework experience would improve both the mastery level grades, that is a grading a homework assignment above 90%, and that it would diminish the number of homework assignments that were turned in at under the 50% mark, which would be an incomplete grade. I would justify this hypothesis, or at least this suspicion, by saying that a student who's not doing their homework might have a lot of reasons, and that one of them might be that they're organizationally challenged. So they're having a difficult time remembering their textbook home, they're losing it at home, their time is poorly managed, or they're unsure of when the due dates are. They may choose not to do homework because of a lack of feedback. If you're a student who's not sure that you're doing the problem correctly and you don't get feedback until you turn the work in, it's discouraging because you might be making the same mistake over and over again and wind up getting a very low grade on the assignment, and that might not be worth your time. And lastly, again, I think we've mentioned that there's a limited access may be a hurdle, and so might organization for a teenager. Math Lab was chosen because it addresses many of these concerns. You're seeing a screen that a student might see when doing a homework assignment that I've assigned to them. It lists a due date, a current score, so all of your feedback is scored, all of your work is scored in real time. You can do these problems out of sequence, and when you do them, you're given a quick fantastic or something equally encouraging when you answer the question correctly, or you're told that your answer is not correct. You are allowed by default to attempt these problems over and over and over and over again. So when you get a problem wrong, that's not the end of the story. You just hit similar question and you're given another chance to answer something nearly identical. The website randomly generates multiple versions of these questions so that different students do different versions of the problem, and so that you can attempt similar versions of the problem over and over and over again without guessing leading you to the correct answer. We've mentioned organization. This shows a student what their grade is and on which homework assignments and why. And I want to refer you to existing research that was already supportive of transitioning to online homework prior to my study. This quote you're seeing from Birch and Kuo simply summarized their findings that students who participated in online homework did better on exams. This is kind of a bottom line. Do students do better or worse on their tests? But it is a bottom line that was reinforced over and over again by other papers that cited this work. when a student transitions to online homework, there is research that suggests what might or might not be a best practice for this change. So, students see a bigger improvement with online homework, according to Hedgeman and others, when this is partnered with an in-person instruction component to the classroom. So there is research to suggest that distance learners don't necessarily do better than they would have done in classroom, and that students who are and that students who have let for students for whom attendance might be an obstacle have similar problems. The That is a particular study that we've mentioned with Hedgeman, sort of looked at a classroom where the online homework was accompanied by video tutorials of how to do specific examples that were recorded by the teacher. Wherever possible, I've tried to absorb suggestions and incorporate them into my experimental group, wanting not just because these are my students and I wanted to do the most I could to help them succeed, but also because I wanted to, in this study, present what would be a best case for an online homework setting, not one just so that it is highly controlled for a single variable, whether the exact same problems were answered in person or in text or online, but what the potential for online homework was when fully integrated into the classroom. So it is worth mentioning that not all research was positive. As I said, distance learners and students struggling with attendance have been shown not to see the same benefits. But I did move forward through this with the assumption that we probably would see some improvement. Before we begin looking at how the study was conducted, it's worth mentioning that it's worth mentioning again that this was an action research project. I did not purposefully refuse online homework utilities from a particular group of my own students, but rather I compared the year before to the year after in a most meaningful and well-controlled way as possible. So, as we've mentioned, the My Math Lab product belongs to Pearson Publishing. They are also the publishers of Essentials of College Algebra. The algorithm which produces random questions is beginning as a kernel those questions that were already published in the 11th edition text. So, what you see as a random analog if you are a student is virtually identical except for the number 3 perhaps being swapped for the number 5 or some other minor substitution being made. We know from in my study that students were doing nearly identical problems that were intended to be plus or minus 20 minutes per day of work. In the former case, that is the year prior, when students were still working in the text, they were given homework assignments to complete every 2 days and turn in every 2 days. For the My Math Lab students, first time, they were given assignments in 1 week blocks where a assignment, instead of being 2 days worth of 20 minutes of practice, would be 80 minutes in one go. This should, unless there is some significant difference in writing versus typing an answer, the time investment on the half of the students should be very similar, or about 80 minutes over the course of a week. When students were completing their homework through a text in class, they were synced to notes that we took that day. We still took notes in class for the online homework group, that's the year following, but these notes were also published to Google Classroom. Grading was intended to be as similar as possible. Students who completed in handwritten work were given a 100 for their assignment if it was above 70% accuracy, were penalized 15 points per day per the campus policy, and could earn up to a 50 if they turned their work in late the day before the test. My Math Lab was graded in 10-point intervals. If a student made an 83, they were given a 90. If a student made a 91, they were given 100, and was otherwise a direct translation from online into the gradebook. There was still a 15-point penalty per day for the online math students. 4, so you are now seeing a chart that compares the textbook instruction to the math lab, the online math lab instruction. This shows the rate of incomplete work. As we noted earlier, this denotes a score that was beneath a 50, meaning that the student did not, would not, could not, or should not have invested whatever amount of time or understanding it took to actually complete the assignment. For the very first, well, let's say that in general, what you're seeing here is a blue trend for MyMathLab, which did trend much lower for incomplete work than the students completing paper assignments. You'll see that the MathLab trends are broken into smaller portions. This should denote that, as we mentioned earlier, students were given MathLab assignments in 80-minute chunks over the course of a week, and so they were given assignments half as frequently. So you'll see that the trend lines are cover about half the space that the orange ones do. The only exceptions to the pattern that MyMathLab students had incomplete homework less often than paper students was here at the beginning, where there was some learning curve for using MathLab for the first time, and also over here at the end, for which I can't specifically account for. The lower rates of incomplete work correlate almost perfectly to improved mastery levels with the MyMathLab students. You'll see that for the very first assignment in paper and pencil, 100% of students made a 90 or above on the assignment. This, along with the first day motivators that students have, is likely due to the fact that the odds provided in the back of the textbook paired perfectly with the even counterparts given as the homework assignment for that particular assignment. For the remainder of the work, you'll see that there is a clear trend of the MathLab students outperforming the on-paper students. So at the very end of the semester, we did take class averages for each of the 4 exams covered by the homework assignments. And if you'll recall, the specific purpose of this was not to compare test grades, but when we did do so, the outcome was telling. In blue, you'll see the paper, the textbook-based homework students' exam scores. With only one exception, they're lower than the MyMathLab students. You see in orange the exact grade that the MathLab students made on their tests. Gray is an adjusted average. So from the year prior to the year forward, we did make some effort to ensure that the students were completing the same problems for their homework assignments. The MathLab utility that creates the homework problems and does so using random numbers can also be used to create tests with random numbers. And using that utility, we were able to use the same questions for the year prior as the year forward, except to swap them out for different values to have different versions from year to year and from student to student. One change that we did make was to replace 2 multiple choice answers that had about an 80% accuracy with 2 short answer questions, simply removing the multiple choice options. The net impact on scores for this was to lower test grades by 4 points. Notwithstanding that change, students still performed better in the MathLab group than the paper homework group. If you account for that change and you raise the averages, and you see this as the MathLab adjusted scores by 4 points exactly, which was the average difference, you're able to get a p-value of 0.019, which falls well below a 0.05 threshold for determining whether or not there's a statistically significant improvement in exam grades. So we were pleased to see that the exam grades improved in a statistically significant way. And based on that change, I feel that result alone warrants my recommendation that any classroom that can should transition to online homework. In addition to that, I would say that there is a positive feedback loop here that deserves special mention. Students who do math lab assignments get feedback instantaneously. That means that teachers aren't investing time grading this homework necessarily, and students aren't, and there's no delay in them getting their work back either. Because teachers don't have to hand grade every assignment that they give, they are capable of assigning more homework than they could grade by hand. This means that students are getting more practice. Students learn more quickly when they're told immediately whether or not they're getting the answer right or wrong, which means that they can do more problems, which means that they can do more practice on this end. This creates a positive feedback loop that if you do decide to transition your class into online homework will make an enormous difference in your in the quality in the worthwhileness of engaging in math homework. Just to repeat where we started, math homework is where students do math. If you believe that math is worth teaching, you should believe that it's worth doing. And seeing the difference between an online homework group and a textbook group, I highly recommend making that transition if you share those values as well. I want to note some great work that informed my study as I went through it. I highly encourage you to do reading I highly encourage you to visit any of these texts if you want to learn more about online homework before you implement it in your classroom. I'm extremely grateful to you for seeing this presentation, and I hope you have a wonderful morning or afternoon.